Hello, my name is Dr. Raoul Mclaughlin. I am an independent research scholar and author. My research interests involve the Roman economy and Roman trade. This includes commerce, conflict and exploration beyond the frontiers of the empire. I have written several books and articles on these subjects and posted a series of online YouTube lectures on connected topics. I was educated at Lagan College in Belfast, a cross-community school founded to respect people of different cultural and religious backgrounds without the divisions of race or social class. I attended Queen's University, where I took a degree in Irish archaeology and classical ancient history. I completed a master's degree that included the late Roman Empire and the early Byzantine era. My doctoral research led to a PhD in ancient history. Studying Roman commerce, I devised and published a new model to explain the Roman economy called the Eastern Commercial Revenue Model. As part of this research, I studied territories beyond the Roman frontiers, including Africa, Arabia, India, and China. I worked as a tutor at Queen's University for 8 years, teaching classical Athens and the Roman Republic. I currently work in a clinical care facility that provides nursing care for patients with complex medical needs, including palliative care for elderly people with dementia and people with severe learning disabilities. Recently, my workplace has been repurposed to provide a clinical unit for COVID-19 patients. I continue with my academic research and release my work in co-authored publications and online lectures. There is a link below to my academia website, including a worksheet containing the ancient sources for these lectures on Africa. Thank you.
Ancient Sources on Africa, Part 1. Roman Geography. The Shape of Africa. The Romans conquered the Mediterranean coastline of North Africa, but this strip of land was only a fraction of the continent. Inland from the fertile coastal zones, the increasingly barren land was occupied by Berber herdsmen, who formed powerful nations. Further inland was the vast Saharan desert, which stretched across the entire continent, from the Red Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. The desert extended nearly 1,000 miles from north to south, with an expanse larger than the entire landmass of the Roman Empire. The Sahara was a major barrier to contact, and therefore the Greeks and Romans did not understand the true scale of the African continent. They thought the African landmass ended somewhere just south of the Saharan desert and did not extend far beyond the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa in Somalia. The Romans referred to the entire African landmass as Libya, and any areas south of the Sahara were collectively referred to as Ethiopia. All sub-Saharan peoples were referred to as Ethiopians, and their land was thought to occupy a small fringe of territory just south of the desert. The Romans theorized that the Ethiopian coast faced an unexplored sea, a southern part of the great encircling world ocean. Here are the ancient texts.
Roman Geography. Regarding the shape of Africa. Source: Pliny. Natural History, Book 6, Passage 38. As for Africa, if you take an average from all the various accounts given of its dimensions, its length works out at 3,798 miles, and the breadth of the inhabited portions isn't more than 750 miles. But Agrippa made it 910 miles at the Saranic part of the country by including the African desert as far as the country of the Garamantes. The extent was then known, so the entire length that comes into the calculation amounts to 4,708 miles. Now, the length of Asia is admittedly 6,375 miles. The breadth of Africa should be properly calculated from the Ethiopic Sea to Alexandria on the Nile. This makes the measurement run through Meroe and Cynene, which gives 1,875 miles. It is clear that Europe is a little less than 1.5 times the size of Asia, and 2 1/6 times the width of Africa. Combining all these figures together, it will be obvious that Europe is a little more than 1/3 and 1/8 of the whole Earth. Asia is 1/4 and 1/14, and Africa 1/5 and 1/16. Source: Pliny. Natural History, Book 13, Passage 33. The interior of Africa, as far as the Garamantes, is desert, covered with palms remarkable for their size and their luscious fruit. The most celebrated is in the neighbourhood of the Temple of Ammon. Source: Strabo, Geography, Book 17, Passage 3. Next, let me describe Libya, that is Africa, which is the only part left for the completion of my geography as a whole. I have said a lot about this country before, but I must now also comment on other matters that might be appropriate and add what has not been mentioned before. Now, the writers who have divided the inhabited world according to its continents have divided it unequally. A threefold division indicates a division into 3 equal parts. But Africa is not as much as 1/3 of the inhabited world. Even if it were combined with Europe, it would not be equal to Asia. Perhaps it's even smaller than Europe. Well, it is much inferior in influence, for the largest part of its interior and of its ocean coast is desert. It is dotted with settlements, but they are small, scattered, and mostly nomadic. In addition to its deserts, the fact that it is a breeding place for wild beasts drives people out, even from lands that could otherwise be inhabited. And also, it overlaps a considerable part of the scorching, torrid zone. However, the whole coast opposite to us, between the Nile and the Pillars, in particular the part which was subject to the Carthaginians, is settled and prosperous. But even here and there are some places that lack water. For example, in the regions about the Syrtes, the Marmandai, and the Catabathmus. Africa has the shape of a right-angled triangle, as if it were drawn on a flat surface. It has the coast opposite us as its baseline, from Egypt and the Nile to Mauritania and the Pillars. The perpendicular side of the triangle is formed by the Nile, as far as Ethiopia, and I have shaped this towards the ocean. The side of the triangle opposite the right angle is the whole of the coast between the Ethiopians and the Mauritanians. The apex of this right-angled triangle begins approximately with the torrid zone. Well, this is only a guess, because it is inaccessible. In a previous part of my work, I have said that if you go southwards from Alexandria to Meroe, the royal seat of the Ethiopians, the distance is about 10,000 stadia. That's 1,000 miles. From there, go in a straight line to the boundaries between the torrid zone and the inhabited world, and that is 3,000 stadia. The same distance should be put down as the maximum breadth of Africa. By this I mean 13 or 14,000 stadia, with a little less than double that amount as its length. Well, this is my account of Africa as a whole. But now I must describe it in detail. I shall begin with its western, or more famous, parts.
In ancient times, large stretches of North Africa were forested and contained abundant wild animals, but this habitat was destroyed in the Roman era, and many species became endangered or extinct due to deforestation or overhunting. This included animals such as the North African forest elephant, used by Carthaginian armies during the Punic Wars of the Roman Republic. There were two main population zones in coastal North Africa. These were the Greek territories of Cyrenaica in the east and the Roman province conquered from Carthage that they named Africa, or Africa Proconsularis. Both regions were superabundant producers of grain, olives, and palm tree dates. West of Africa Proconsularis was a semi-desert coastal territory known as Mauritania. Mauritania was a Berber kingdom, which extended to the Atlantic coast of what is now northern Morocco. This territory was subject to Rome, and ruled by a Roman-backed client king until AD 41. Mauritania is dominated by a chain of inland mountains called the Atlas, which run parallel to the coast and merge into the Middle and High Atlas ranges near the Atlantic. A series of low plains stretch from the foothills of the Atlas range towards the Mediterranean coast. But the streams that empty into this depression are poisoned by the salinity of the surrounding wastelands and produce an almost continuous series of bitter lakes called the Shot. Western Mauritania extended only a short distance beyond the Mediterranean. This small corner of North Morocco was encircled by the high ranges of the Atlas Mountains, which were once surrounded by dense forests on their Atlantic-facing side. Inland territories in western Mauritania were occupied by Berber tribes, including the semi-nomadic Maures, who became the Moors of later history. Greek geographers therefore referred to this territory as Maurosia. Here are the ancient sources.
Roman geography. Maurosia in northwest Africa. This is ancient Morocco. Source: Strabo, Geography, Book 17, Section 3, Passage 4. However, everybody agrees that Maurosia is a fertile country, and it is supplied with both lakes and rivers, except for a small desert part. The number and the size of its trees are large, and everything can be manufactured from them. This is the country that supplies the Romans with tables made from one single piece of very large, variegated wood. The rivers are said to contain crocodiles and other kinds of animals similar to those in the Nile. Some think that even the sources of the Nile are near the extremities of Maurosia. And they say that in a certain river, leeches 7 cubits long are found, with their gills pierced through with holes through which they breathe. They also say that this country produces a vine so thick that it can hardly be encircled by the arms of 2 men, and this yields fruit clusters of almost 1 cubit. Every herb grows high, and also every vegetable. For example, the arum and the draconium, and the stalks of the Falencii, the Hippomarathonii, and the Scoliomii. They grow to 12 cubits high and 4 palms thick. There are also serpents, elephants, gazelles, babali, and similar animals. And as for lions and leopards, this country nurtures them in every way. It also produces ferrets as large as cats. These even look like cats, except that their noses project further out. There are also a very great number of apes. Posidonius states that when he was sailing from Galera to Italy, he was close to the Libyan coast. He saw a low-lying shore with a forest full of these animals. Some were in the trees, and others were on the ground. But he began to laugh when he saw them. Some were feeding their young with heavy breasts, and some had bald heads, and others were ruptured or displayed similar disabilities of that kind. On the outside sea above Mauritania is the sparsely settled country of the so-called Western Ethiopians. According to Epicrates, camel leopards are found here, also elephants and the rhinoceros. These are shaped like bulls, but they're like elephants in their size, in their way of life, and in their courage in fighting. And he speaks of serpents that are so large that even grass grows upon their backs. Epicrates says that when the lions attack young elephants, they flee after they have drawn blood, because the mothers approach. But when the mothers see their young stained with the blood, they kill them, so the lions can return to the victims and eat them. And he says that when Bogus, the king of the Mauritians, went up against the Western Ethiopians, he sent gifts down to his wife. These were reeds, like those in India, with each joint holding 8 chinoses, and there was also asparagus of a similar size. Although most of the country inhabited by the Mauritians is fertile, most of the people persist in living a nomadic life, even to this day. Above these people, near the Western Ethiopians, live the Pharusians and the Nigretes. Like the Ethiopians, they use bows, and they drive scythe-bearing chariots. The Pharusians rarely mix with others, not even with the Mauritians. When they pass through the desert, they carry skins of water fastened beneath the bellies of their horses. However, sometimes they travel through certain marshy regions and over lakes as far as Kirta. Some of them are said to live like troglodytes and dig their homes into the earth. And it is said that summer rains are common here as well, but that in the winter there is a drought. Some of the inhabitants in this part of the world use the skins of snakes and fish as wraps and as bed covers. And some people say that the Mauritanians are the Indians who came here with Hercules. A little before my time, the country was in the possession of the kings of the House of Bogus and Bocchus. They were friends of the Romans. But when they died, Juba succeeded to the throne. Augustus Caesar gave him the land, in addition to his father's empire. He was the son of that same Juba who waged war with Scipio against the deified Caesar. Now his son Juba has lately died, but his son, Ptolemy, whose mother was the daughter of Anthony and Cleopatra, has now succeeded to the throne. Beyond Mauritania. Source: Strabo. Geography. Book 17. After the land of the Mauritanians is that of the Massicilians. This begins at the Mobochath River and ends at the Triton Promontory, which is the boundary between their land and the Massilians. The distance between Metagonium to Trium is 6,000 stadia, though some might say less. The coast is a good territory and has several cities and rivers, but it is sufficient only to mention those that are prominent. At a distance of about 1,000 stadia from the border is Sija, previously the royal residence of Sophax, but it is now in ruins. After Sophax, the country was possessed by the Massinenses, and then by the Missipases, then by his successors. In my time it was ruled by Juba, whose son Juba has recently died. Zama, his royal residence, has been laid in ruins by the Romans. After Siga, and at a distance of 600 stadia, is Theolimin. And after this there are other, but insignificant, places. The parts deep in the interior are mountainous and are wasteland. They are interspersed sometimes with habitations, and these are held by the Gaelutians, even as far as the Syrtes. But the lands near the sea consist of fertile plains, with many cities, rivers, and lakes. I don't know whether Paulinus tells us the truth when he says that Africa is intersected by, and I quote, only a few small rivers. The rivers between Lynx and Carthage are mentioned by Artemidorus, who says they are, and I quote, both many and large. Now, this statement would be more true about the interior of the country. He says himself that this is because no rain falls in the northern parts. Well, this is also thought to be the case in Ethiopia. Therefore, pestilence can often arise because of droughts. And when the lakes are filled with mud, the locust prevails. Somewhere, here and there, are also copper mines, and there is a sprig of asphalt. Writers also speak of a multitude of scorpions, both with and without wings, and these are huge in size. Likewise, there are tarantulas, which are exceptional both in size and in number, and lizards, said to be 2 cubits long. Lichnight and Carthaginian stones can be found in the mountainside. And in the plains, there are oyster shells and mussel shells in great quantities, like those mentioned by me in my description of Ammon. There is also a tree called the melilotus, from which they prepare a wine. And some of the people have land that produces 2 crops of grain, so they can reap 2 harvests, one in the spring and the other in the summer. The grain stalk is 5 cubits in height and has the thickness of a little finger, and yields a crop 240-fold. In the spring, they don't even need to sow seed. They just harrow the ground lightly with bundles of paniurite. They are satisfied that the grain seed that has fallen out of the ear at the time of harvest will produce a perfect summer crop. The people work with leggings on because of the number of wild animals, and they clothe the rest of their bodies with skins. And when they lie down to sleep, they smear the end of their beds with garlic, and they tie a bunch of pylori around them on account of the scorpions. On this coast was a city named Lol, which Juba, that is the father of Ptolemy, rebuilt and changed its name to Caesarea. It has a harbour with a small island in front of it. Between Caesarea and Trium is a large harbour called Salada, which is now the boundary between the territories subject to Juba and the Romans. The divisions of the country have been made in various ways, and this is because the Romans have dealt with several occupants in a dissimilar manner and at different times. Some have been treated as friends, and others as enemies. The result was that different parts were taken away from or presented to different peoples. But this was not done in a similar way.
In AD 41, the Emperor Caligula summoned King Ptolemy, the son of Juba II, to Rome. Caligula had Ptolemy killed and announced his intention to annex Mauritania and bring northwest Africa under his direct imperial control. But this provoked an uprising among the Moors who dominated the desert territories inland from the urbanized coast. Led by Edamon, a loyal freedman of the murdered King Ptolemy, the region revolted from Roman rule. Caligula appointed a commander named Suetonius Paulinus to defeat the rebels, restore order, and annex this new frontier territory. Suetonius Paulinus is better known to historians as the governor who defeated a revolt by Queen Boadicea in Roman Britain 20 years later. These military operations are described by Pliny the Elder and Dio Cassius. Pliny begins by reporting earlier Roman knowledge of Mauritania. Here are the ancient sources.
Information from an explorer. Suetonius Paulinus, describing the Atlas Mountains in AD 41. Source: Pliny, Natural History, Book 5, Passage 1. During his command in Africa, Scipio gave a fleet of ships to the historian Polybus to make a voyage of discovery in that part of the world. After sailing round the coast, Polybus reported that, in a westerly direction beyond Mount Atlas, there are forests teeming with the wild animals that Africa produces. After this, there is the river Assa. Beyond this river live the Ethiopio tribe of the Persosai, and further inland, the Farusai. Adjoining these, in the interior lands, live the Gaiutean Darai, while the Ethiopian Daratai people dwell on the coast. Next comes the River Non, which is full of crocodiles and hippopotami. From the Non, there is a line of mountains going right up to a mountain peak that the Greeks call the Chariot of the Gods. Polybus gives the distance from this peak to Cape Roxo as a voyage of 10 days and nights. In the middle of this space, he places Mount Atlas, which everybody else says is at the furthest point of Mauritania. The first time that the Roman army fought in Mauritania was during the principate of Claudius, when King Ptolemy had been put to death by Caligula, and his freedman, Aedamon, was seeking revenge. It's an accepted fact that after our troops defeated the locals, they pursued them as far as Mount Atlas. There were not only ex-consuls and generals from the Senate commanding in that campaign, but also the Knights of Rome, who subsequently governed the country. All were able to boast that they had once passed through the Atlas mountain range. Now, the province contains 5 Roman colonies. Now, you might think that this place is easily reached, but if you were to try it, you'd soon find out that you were wrong. I notice that people of high standing aren't always inclined to admit the truth. This is because they're ashamed of their lack of knowledge. As a result, they're not slow to spread falsehoods. But it's hard not to believe if a person in authority says something, even if it isn't true. As for me, I'm not surprised that some things are beyond the knowledge of gentlemen of the equestrian order, and nowadays some of them actually get into the Senate. It seems that nothing is unknown that cannot be acquired for the luxury and extravagance. Oh, that is an extremely great and powerful motivation. And for its sake, the forests are ransacked for ivory and citrus wood, and searches are made over the rocks of Gaetulia for sea snails that give murex for purple dyes. The Atlas Mountains, and further. Source: Pliny. Natural History, Book 5, Passage 1. Suetonius Paulinus, who was consul in our own times, was the first Roman commander who actually crossed the Atlas range and advanced many miles beyond it. His report agrees with all the other authorities that it rises to a remarkable height. But he also says that the regions at the base of the range are filled with tall, dense forests of trees of an unknown kind. They have very lofty trunks, remarkable for their glossy timber that is quite free from knots. Their foliage is like the cypress tree, except for its oppressive scent. And the leaves are covered with thin, downy floss. Maybe, with the right skills, a fabric could be made from this floss, like the one we obtain from the silkworm. Suetonius Paulinus continued his report by saying that the summit is covered with deep snowdrifts, even in summer. Beyond the summit, he marched across deserts covered with black dust, occasionally broken up by protruding rocks that also looked as if they had been burnt up. Because of the heat, this region is uninhabited. And although it was winter time when Suetonius explored it, he states that the neighbouring forests swarm with every kind of elephant and snake, and a tribe called the Canonare live there. These people share the meat from the wild animals they hunt with their dogs. After marching for 10 days, Suetonius arrived at the river Gaius. Now it is certain that the next people on the journey are the Ethiopian tribe called the Persori. Juba, the father of Ptolemy, was the first ruler to hold sway over both Mauritanias. Now Juba is better known for his reputation as a student than for being a royal or a king. He has published similar facts about Mount Atlas and has stated in addition that a plant grows there called the euphorbia, named after his doctor who discovered it. In a book which is only about this plant, Juba recommends its milky sap as being very remarkable. He says that it improves the eyesight, and it is an antidote against snake bite and poisons of all kinds. Well, that's enough. Well, more than enough about Mount Atlas. Source: Dio Cassius, Histories, Book 60, Passage 9, Section 20. The following year, the same Moors made war again, and they were subdued. Suetonius Paulinus, one of the ex-praetors, overran their country as far as Mount Atlas. After him, Gnaeus Hostius Geta, also an ex-praetor, marched against their general Salabus, and twice defeated him. Salabus left a few soldiers near the frontier to hold back anyone who was coming after him, and he took refuge in the arid wilderness. Firstly, Geta stationed part of his army opposite the enemy detachment that was lying in wait for pursuers. Then, after providing himself with as much water as possible, he decided to push forward and follow Salabus into the desert. When the water was used up and no more was available, Geta found himself in difficulties. Out of habit, the enemy barbarians could hold out a long time against thirst. Besides, they were familiar with the country, and they could always get at least some water. Whereas the Romans, unused to thirst and unfamiliar with the desert, found it impossible to advance and very difficult to retreat. Geta did not know what to do. Then, one of the friendly natives persuaded him to try some incantations and enchantments. And that was how abundant water had often been given to his people. Well, no sooner had Geta followed this advice than so much rain fell from the sky that it quenched the soldiers' thirst completely. At the same time, this alarmed the enemy, who thought that heaven was coming to the assistance of a Roman general. As a consequence, Salabus was able to end his warfare and make terms. After these events, Claudius divided the subject Moors into two districts. The first in the region around Tingis, and the other around Caesarea. These districts are named from the cities. The emperor appointed 2 knights as governors. At the same time, parts of Numidia were attacked by the neighbouring barbarians. But after they had been defeated in battle, things became quiet again.
20 years later, when Paulinus was governor of southern Britain, he led a large Roman expedition west to attack unconquered territory in northern Wales. This was at the western limit of Britain, and Paulinus fought to capture the island of Anglesey on the coast facing the Irish Sea. He was the first Roman to reach this outer region, near the western edge of the known world. Here is the ancient source.
The character of Suetonius Paulinus, his later commands in Britain. Source: Tacitus, Annals, Book 14, Passage 29. In the consulate of Cneus Praetus and Petronius Turpinanus, there was a bad reversal of public order in Britain. As I have mentioned, the legate, Aristidius, had done nothing other than hold ground already won. His successor, Veranius, after aggravating the Silurians with a few raids of no great significance, died without any other conflicts. Veranius was famous for being stubbornly independent, but in the closing words of his will, amid a huge amount of flattery to Nero, he added that if he had lived for another 2 years, he would have laid Britain at Nero's feet. But for the present, Britain was in the charge of Suetonius Paulinus. This man believed that nobody was his match for military skill and popularity. And this made Corbulo his rival. Suetonius was anxious to crush a national enemy, such as the rebels in Britain. In order to equal the laurels Corbulo had won by his recovery of Armenia. As a result, he prepared to attack the island of Manna, Anglesey. This island was well populated and provided a safe haven for refugees. Suetonius constructed a flotilla of flat-bottom boats for the infantry to cross. These are shallow but unpredictable channel waters. The cavalry followed by fording this water until it became deeper. There, they continued by swimming beside their horses.
This episode revealed the character of Suetonius Paulinus, which involved risk-taking ventures to the geographical limits of unexplored regions. His journey beyond the Atlas Mountains may have confirmed the Greek and Roman belief that inner Africa was an immense, impassable desert.